The importance of diversity and inclusion has been recognised for many years, but banking is still a male-dominated industry.
So how does this impact on the women who work in the industry? Well, to tell us about the experiences of the women in Treasury, I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Sophie Jackson. Sophie is the joint publisher of Treasury Today and leader of the Women in Treasury initiative, and also Challenor. Now, Di is the General Manager, Global Transaction Services at Westpac. A very good day to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us on Sibos TV. Sophie, let me start with you first. Now, the Women in Treasury is now in its sixth year, so congratulations. Tell us about the initiative and what its objectives are.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, yes, 6 years of Women in Treasury. And it's interesting to be here at Sibos to see how far the whole industry's come, actually. We set up Women in Treasury because I think 6-7 years ago, when you'd go to conferences, there would only be maximum one female treasurer on a panel. And when the women were walking the floors, they would feel very much in a minority, I think. So from our conversations with our readership, it was obvious that there was a need for a platform that could bring them together to kind of inspire one another, to offer career guidance. And so that's how the Women in Treasury initiative started.
So for your annual global study, which is fantastic, focuses on the experience of women who work in Treasury. What were some of the key findings from the 2018 survey?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting looking over the last 6 years of the study, actually. But this year, we changed up the study questions for the first time, and we had over 50% new respondents. So we're looking at a fresh data set at the moment. And things that came away for me was, for the first time, we've got quotas accelerating in this report. So when we're looking at quotas for female representation at board level, we ask our women in corporate finance what they think. 44% supported that this year, and only 32% were against. That's a 12% difference there. Also, we looked at parity on a slightly more negative note. 39% of our respondents still feel they're not paid the same as their male colleagues at the same level. So there needs to be improvements made there. And then, yeah, on a positive note, we talked to our respondents about mentoring, sponsorship and coaching. I think those resources are key to getting women to the next stage of their careers. And they shared with us some interesting findings around their experiences of using each of those at different stages.
Okay, so these are the most recent findings, but let's look back over the 6-year landscape with the surveys that you've been carrying out. I mean, what are the changes overall in the 6 years that you've seen in women's experiences? Where are the areas that are showing signs of improvement, but where are the weaknesses? What still needs to be improved? Yeah,
so I mentioned quotas there, and I think that's where we're clearly sort of having a change there in women's perspectives, at least. The first year that we ran the Women in Treasury study, so that's 2013, we had 6% more against quotas for female representation. Now, this year we've got 12% more in favour. So I think women are quite galvanised. Women in Treasury doesn't exist in a vacuum, and at a broader mainstream cultural level, there's been a lot going on that we've all seen, right? And I think it has made women less afraid to speak out when they see injustice. I think it's made them more galvanised to encourage each other and to support one another. So that's something that I've seen evolve as well. But obviously the parity aspect is not good to see. And without transparency on remuneration, we're not going to know if those women's perceptions that they're paid less are correct or not.
Di, you're a high-profile woman in the industry. What is your personal experience of working alongside Treasury functions in some of the world's biggest banks?
Yeah, so I've had a really unique experience in the fact of I serve a lot of our corporate and institutional clients, so I get to see the treasurers of large multinationals, large governments and large Australian corporates, and then I get to work with the Treasury function within a large bank, which really is responsible for the funding and the balance sheet management of an enterprise. So for me, I've sort of seen two sides of it. In having a lot of experience in Asia, that's really enabled women to be very successful in that Treasury function. I take it down to the fact of a society that enables women to go back to work, where there's no difference really around who does the working responsibilities in a family. And then in a bank area, I've seen sort of the hard-nosed view of a woman in those environments. And if you break Treasury down into a couple of things versus Treasury in terms of funding a bank versus a financial markets environment, which has always been quite male-dominated, I'm really fortunate to work at Westpac, which has really driven diversity across the enterprise. We now have 50% of our women in leadership is women in leadership. So that is a really amazing thing about a company that essentially set a quota in some respects, wasn't too hard-nosed about it, but allowed women to really flourish and rise within our organisation.
Di, I'd like to stay with you on that because, I mean, you are a globe-trotter in your career because you've worked in the United Kingdom, Asia and Australia. And I'm fascinated that Westpac really took the initiative on this in setting quotas, and they wanted it, they saw the positivity of it. But is that quite unusual in banks? I mean, you talked about the Asian experience. How does that approach of quotas compare, for example, to banks in the UK?
Yeah, so maybe I should talk about the US banks where primarily my experience was working in Asia. I think the quota is always a tough subject. So I've probably spent the last 20 years going, oh, not sure about quotas, sure about quotas, not sure about quotas. But I think having the Westpac experience has shown me that if you put a measurement in place and that you ensure that the right quality of resources rise within that quota environment, then I think it's okay. I think there's this view that, well, we'll have a quota and we'll put incompetent people in those roles. I don't think that's the case for male or females. I think that you've got to be capable to be in that position, and I think that the Australian, especially Westpac, has taken a leadership position in that area. I think there's a challenge though for banks and for employers in general in terms of getting women wanting those opportunities. That's something I get challenged with in my role is, the women will say, well, I need to do these other duties, or, am I really ready for that leadership role? So I think women still need to grow that confidence. And I think that different countries make it easier for women to be in the workplace with the support structures that operate versus other countries like the UK, the US and even Australia, where it's really tough to be a working mum. I've been up since 4 o'clock making sandwiches, getting their lunches ready, doing all that, and then I've got to go into a meeting and get to financials at 9 a.m. in the morning. Like, that's a lot on your plate. And then worrying about what play date they're getting to in the afternoon and who's going to do their homework. And so as a working mother, there's a lot. And sometimes it's the right choice to say, look, I'm going to be at home with my kids, and then there's a time for the career later.
Diversity in corporate finance is clearly something that you've been quite a champion for.
Yes.
From your perspective, what are the benefits of networks like Women in Treasury, which you've obviously supported for so many years?
Yeah, I think it's about giving women confidence. It's about it's about having someone to make that phone call and say, hey, I'm grappling with this. Can you help me? Have you seen this before? And I think that's one of the challenges that I saw over my career as being, coming to where I am now. But in those early days, I needed people to talk to, and it was a little hard to go and ask the guy that I worked with. I kind of wanted the female that I could have the conversation with, who got me where I was coming from on an emotional level, and then could also help me deal with workplace challenges. So it's just having that person to go to, and also that, oh my gosh, they've done it, I can do it, and I think that's the most important thing about women like myself, is that we show women either at the same level of us or more, growing their careers, that it is possible. And role modelling is a really important piece. And, when Sophie and I connected many years ago around this initiative, I just said, we've got to do this. We've got to be forefront in terms of driving more inclusion and more diversity in our workplaces.
So given that, Di, what advice would you offer women who are starting out with their careers in the Treasury sector? Because it is competitive, it is tough, and as you said, sometimes women who are quite young in their careers, they're a little bit afraid to actually get advice and talk to people.
Oh, look, my advice would be know your craft really well. I really believe in deep subject matter expertise, and then just back yourself. Take the risk, put yourself out there. I sort of look at my career and say, well, one of the reasons why I've been successful and I am where I am today is I really drove to want to get involved in things. I moved out of the realms of my role and got engaged in the organisations that I worked with. I took on things that I wasn't really sure I was ready for, but I thought, what the heck, let's give it a go. And I see that today, the difference between the genders in that, you know, and a male might not have all of the capability, but they back themselves and they go. And I'd say the same for young women. Just back yourself, and if you know your stuff and you're getting really positive feedback from your manager and your colleagues, then push it harder and drive it. You're the one who can drive your career, and you work in a workplace that enables you to do that. The opportunities are there for you.
Sophie, there's been considerable research into the impact of diversity and inclusion on organisations. What do you see as the key benefits for banks and corporates?
Yeah, so I think going back to the 90s, you start to see the first of these studies, right? And every year more and more come out. So I feel like the business case for diversity and inclusion has been proven. But I mean, at a simple level, I interviewed someone a while ago who was talking about post-global financial crisis. And he put it to me like this: if you've got all of one person sat around a table, you're not going to make the best decisions. And I laughed at the time, but it really resonated with me and stuck with me for a long time. If we want to have innovative and creative ideas, and those are words that get bandied around a lot now in the financial sector, you're going to have people that will flex your mind and push you and challenge the decisions that you're making. And you don't do that with all of the same person around a table. So I think for corporations and banks as well, if they want to attract talent, they're going to have to start thinking a bit outside of the box and getting different people in their organizations. If you look at the landscape now for young graduates, they can go and do all number of different things. So to have that pull in for them, I think you're going to have to step up.
Okay, some sound strong advice on which to end this. So guys, if you're listening. But look, Sophie and I thank you so much for joining us on Sibos TV. It's been a pleasure listening to you, talking to you, sharing ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.